Newsfirst, Newsline.
A very good evening to you. You're watching Newsline. Today Faraz couldn't join us, but I will be taking care of you for the next half an hour. We are going to talk about three very important things, and of course we are going to see whether we can find some answers to the questions that you send the viewers. We are going to talk to none other than Mr. Eran Wickramaratne from the Samagi Jana Balawege. Thank you, sir, for being here with us. It's been a busy week for all of you in Parliament.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Let's start off right away. There are few things that is happening in the country. Disturbing, one could say, scary on one hand, but let's start off with the basics first. Now, the Political Victimization Commission report, there was a lot of debate about it at one point, but certain things happened and it got sidetracked. But you have been a person who has been talking about it continuously. What is so bad about this Political Commission report that only a few people in the Samagi Jana Balawege, in the opposition, seems to be very keen on talking about it? You are one of those people. What is the point that you're trying to raise?
I think the issues that the country are facing are much bigger than just the report. We have an economy which is in very, very bad shape, and it's really frightening what the consequences can be. And on the other hand, we have a government which does not is incapable, as far as we can see, in handling differences of opinion and dissent. Now, in a democracy, you should be able to handle dissent and differences of opinion. So I see even this report on you raised on the Commission of Inquiry in that light. The President appointed a Commission of Inquiry in January 2020. He got a report in December 2020. And that report recommended certain actions that should be taken against people who the Commission decided action should be taken against. Then they went one step further, and recently they appointed another special presidential commission, right, to give effect to some of the recommendations in the original Commission of Inquiry. Because the original Commission of Inquiry is under a different law and the Special Presidential Commission of Inquiry is under a different law. So the consequences or the conclusions of the report were in point 8, point 9 and point 10. So they said the point 8 related things go to the Special Presidential Commission report, and that is basically to try to get them to recommend the loss of civic rights of the leading politicians in this country, which means you are eliminating your political opposition. Then, just on the 9th of April, they basically brought and put on the order book of Parliament another resolution, which they will probably at any time they can take and get Parliament to vote on. What that resolution says is that what was in point 9 and 10 in the original report, right, by voting in Parliament, that you could actually give it effect. So what's in 9 and 10? The points that are in 9 and 10 are in three broad categories, but if I were just to deal with maybe a couple of them. One is there are cases pending in the courts, some which are pending, some which have been heard, some which the people who have been victimized have gone and raised issues about. Right? And these cases are of a criminal nature. So you have cases of a criminal nature to do with, like murder, right? You have in the north, there was disappearances of young people. Then there was a case that is involving some military personnel, right? Then there is a case of Wasim Tajuddin. Then there is a case of lots of journalists. Lasantha Wickramatunge had been murdered. Keith Noya's abduction is there. Ekneli Goda has gone missing. So there are a number of these criminal cases, right? So what this resolution seeks to do is, by Parliament voting, basically to take these cases away. And then there are others of financial misappropriation and financial irregularities, cheating, right, bribery and corruption, a whole number of them. There's a Divinaguma, there was a case, there's a case on CWE, there's a case on a house in Malwana, which is allegedly they thought was Basil Rajapaksa's, and so forth and so on. Now I'm a member of Parliament, and for a moment I wouldn't say that anybody mentioned there, or not even the people we are mentioning, are necessarily guilty. But the point that needs to be made is, right, if it is already in the courts of this country, it's only the courts that can either punish or acquit somebody. Right? Just because there are politicians and people even connected to the ruling family, right, and the presidential family, right, even then, now if somebody is not guilty, they don't have to fear the courts, because they will be freed and they come as free people. And if they are not guilty, they must be mentioned as free people. But if they have done wrong, they must be punished by the law. Now the issue here is that Parliament is taking the work of the judiciary, which is totally unacceptable. This is totally unacceptable. In the Constitution, it's very clear in Article 4, there's a separation of powers. The executive, and then there is the legislative power, and then there's the judicial power. And who will exercise that? Here, the legislature is going to delving into the area of the judiciary. And this is totally unacceptable. The other point on this is, why are they talking about these cases? Because a large number of cases, I don't know the exact number, I would say probably about 90 of these cases that were put during our period in office, was put by the Attorney General and the Attorney General's department, right? And who was the Attorney General, right? The Attorney General then was the present Chief Justice of the country, right? Lordship, right? Jayanta Jayasuriya. Now I think this government has to think through, when you do a thing like this, what are you doing? You are bringing the present CJ into disrepute by doing a thing like this. So I think these are things that are politically motivated, not thought through. And then through these commission reports, they're trying to go after the AG's department officials, police officials, investigators, lawyers, and others. Nobody will come forward in the future to do an investigation. So this is deplorable.
Mr. Wickramaratne, in the same light, I have to ask you now, you have been if you look at your past, you have been a businessman, you have been a CEO of a bank, you may not be, your name must not be in these lists or these court cases. So you don't have the necessity to maybe call yourself a politically victimized person, but a person whose name is in that list might feel that he was politically victimized, he was taken revenge from. So in that sense, is it actually fair to say what you're saying and say that all this is bad and this has to be removed? But isn't there at least some light at the end of the tunnel, is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I have never said this before, but because you asked me, I will tell you. I found in a way to my surprise that I am also mentioned in the Presidential Commission of Inquiry. I basically was summoned, I went there, right, and then I didn't know why I was there. And then the former Prime Minister was there. I asked the former Prime Minister why I was here, because I didn't know why I was here. And then he said, there was an anti-corruption committee, and then there was a subcommittee.
You were a member of this?
And I had been appointed a member of the subcommittee. I didn't ever know about it. I knew about it only when the Presidential Commission got me there. Now I have heard that subcommittee has never met.
Yes.
Right? But
But your name is mentioned.
Actually, I take it as an honor. I take it as an honor, because that my name must have been put there to fight corruption, right? And they probably thought that Iran should be on that committee. So I take it as an honor. I have no problem. But I have a problem with the Presidential Commission, right? Because it shows that they don't know what they are actually doing, right? So one is they're interfering with the separation of powers. They are weakening, right, the trust in the public have in the judicial system of the country. Right, and they are also, by this act, politicizing the process. And we need to be very careful that we always defend the separation of powers and always defend the independence of the judiciary. We may or may not agree with all the verdicts that are given. Now, more recently, yesterday, I went all the way, right, to Angunugola Palace to see Mr. Ranjan Ramanayaka, who is serving a prison sentence there. I won't comment on about the sentence, because judges have gone into it. They have looked at the evidence. They have decided that there is a contempt of court,
yes,
and the person needs to basically be punished for it, right? But I looked at it in another way, right? This is against the courts, and the courts are deciding what the punishment is. It's not the fault of the court. It's our fault as Parliament. We should have a law and in that law we should define what the commensurate punishment should be for that offence. So judges are not to blame for that. We are to blame for it. So I said in Parliament today that we must bring a law, a contempt of court law, and whether it's direct contempt or it's indirect contempt, whether it's criminal contempt or whether it is civic contempt, we should spell it out. I've done some studying of the US law, the British law and the Indian law, and I would say that Ranjan Ramanayaka's sentence is not commensurate with the mistakes that he has made. But and I'm saying that to defend the judiciary, because the judiciary needs to be defended, you see, because that's how a country will progress. And even the professionals working in the Attorney General's department, right, some of them are being mentioned in these reports. You see, so what is the message that you are giving? They are professionals. The integrity of the department is at stake, and therefore we have to stand up. Because it is a system. We have to look beyond people, right? So this government is going in the wrong direction.
We have a comprehensive report of what happened in Parliament today with regard to the Political Victimisation Commission on our prime time news. We urge you to stay tuned to News First to watch that as well. We had to go in for the headlines, but before that I want to take you to another dimension. We spoke about this at the start, the economy of the country. There is a fluctuating rupee. On one day it's good, on another day bad, and on the next day it's very bad. But we have the state minister coming forward and saying, you know, we are doing something about this. And on the other hand, we also see a $500 million input to the country, investment loan coming into the country. And we see the rupee strengthening. But in Parliament, we again hear Dr. Harsha De Silva saying 65 million of it has been sold out in the foreign exchange market. But overall, now people watching from home may not understand the complex things that are connected to this rupee. But overall, what is actually happening? Why is the rupee doing good on one day, the next day it's good, and the next day all of a sudden it's very bad? What is actually happening?
I think that an exchange rate, right, works a lot on confidence. Financial markets work on confidence, and the confidence is built on the rule of law, right, on the rule of law, and whether agreements and things will be upheld in the courts of a country, right, and then it is also built on the confidence that people have that you know, governments will honor their agreements and their commitments. And when it comes to the rupee, also they will be looking at, right, macroeconomic policy. So Sri Lanka at the moment is in a big crisis because you have an economic growth rate which is the lowest in history. All the data I quote today is subject to correction when the central bank's annual report comes out at the end of this month. So I think the government is going to say that, you know, GDP growth is probably around 4% or less or whatever, right? My prediction that the real economic growth is much less than that. It's a minus, big number, and this is about the worst. If you take the budget deficit, right, in our period in office, right, we focus mainly on the macroeconomy, right? And our former finance minister, though he was not a finance and economic specialist, you don't have to be, provided you have the right people around you, right? He did a lot to stabilize the macroeconomic situation, Mr. Mangala Samaravira. And he took down the budget deficit, and it was going down to 3.5%. It was about 5%, right, when we left office. Today the budget deficit is more than 10%, the budget deficit. This government came into office, right, and what did they do? They made irresponsible statements while Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was campaigning to become the president, and said, you know, we're going to remove all these taxes. Government revenue fell by about 600 billion, about 1/3. And now what have they done, right, to meet that? Normally you fill it by investments and by taking loans. Here, what they did is they have also printed money. They printed about 600 billion rupees last year in 2020, and another nearly 100 plus rupees, altogether about 800 billion rupees. Now, what's the consequence of this? Two consequences.
800 billion.
800 billion
with
rupees. With a B. Right? They have printed. So what are the consequences? One consequence of this is going to be inflation.
Mr. Wickramaratne, I'll have to stop you there. We have to go for a commercial break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the 800 billion that was printed. Stay tuned.
News First, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline. We were talking about the rupee. We were talking about the fact that 800 billion rupees had been printed in the central bank, and we were just about to talk about the consequences of doing this. What are the consequences?
So one consequence is, you say you have the same goods and services now being chased by more money. So naturally the prices go up.
Yeah.
It's even worse because the economy has been in contraction. So the prices rise. And you would have seen that even during this festive New Year period, right? And you know, people just couldn't afford a lot of things that they would normally do to have their cakes, cookies and their sweetmeats and so forth. And so prices are going to rise. So the escalation in prices will continue. Right, and that's one thing that's happening. The other thing is, with the growth rate being low, the unemployment is at a high. Right, it's nearly about 6%, which is the highest since 2009 unemployment. Right, so the second consequence is going to be the pressure on the exchange rate. Right, and we have seen that already. Right, and the exchange rate has been depreciating quite rapidly. And the government is making a mistake there too. You see, the government is trying to talk its way. We live in a modern society. We live in the information age. Every move that the government does, right, you can't hide it. It's transparent to the people. You know, so the government should focus on macroeconomic policy rather than trying to, you know, kind of create a feel-good factor by just speaking to people. Like, for example, yesterday, I will tell you. Yesterday, the exchange rate was hovering around 200 and 205. Bid and offer, or the buy price and the sell price of $1, right? So what does the government do? It gets the central bank, right, to try to show that it's lower, right? So it will do one transaction late in the day, almost at the close of the markets, at a much lower price, so 192 or something like that. Now this kind of nonsense and this kind of artificial things shouldn't be done. The economy works more on fundamentals, right? So the exchange rate is also going down, right? And then you have the reserve situation. Some time ago the reserves were about 4 billion. I think in a couple of months they have about $1 billion to pay, and then there are a lot of small payments, so it will be probably down by that time to about $2 billion. So how are they actually going to get over this situation, right? The government hasn't been able to clearly spell out, right, a macroeconomic strategy. It's thinking that by closing the economy that it could come out. Now, for example, imports, right? They have closed imports. 80% of our imports are going into basically the intermediate goods or capital goods. And the factory is needed, the manufacturing needs it, and they should be there. So our view is the government is following the wrong economic policy. I said this in Parliament 3 months ago. I said, Mr. President, right, you promised to have a system change. But really, Mr. President, the problem is not a system change. You need a team change because you've got the wrong people around you. I don't blame the President. He's not an economist. He's not an economic specialist. I don't even blame the Prime Minister. He's not an economic specialist. But certainly they need to have the right people around them, right, and not people who just come and say all kinds of things and, you know, talk, but really when you look at the delivery, it's really poor.
You bring us to an interesting point, Mr. Wickramaratne. Now, with this being the main topic at hand, we also see this 500 million coming in, but we also see the Port City Economic Commission bill taking place, the court, Supreme Court, so we can't really delve deep into the contents of it, but the overall concept can be discussed. The magic button, will Port City be the magic button for Sri Lanka to get out of this economic downturn that we are in?
No, it will not be. We need to remember we have a short-term problem and we have a long-term problem. The Port City project itself is a long-term project. You're not going to see the benefits of this for 25 years. Right, and so there's a long term and there's a short term. So in the short term, we can take debt. Now, for example, countries give us debt, and I'm not singling out China here, but lots of countries give us debt, right? So now we got this 500 million from the China Development Bank. It generally is related to some kind of a project, right? And generally, what do all lenders do? And people who studied economics and development economics, you know, wherever, we all know in countries like ours, right? What do? They give us it. Then they say the contract needs to be given to our companies. Then they say you have to buy the equipment from our country. Now there's a new dimension which didn't exist previously. Then they say you have to also employ people from our country. That's the latest dimension, right? So even if you get a $500 million like that, it doesn't add completely to the reserves, because for the reasons I said, largely those payments are made outside, and there's a residual portion which will basically come into the reserves of the country. So when you take the Port City project itself, right, there's a big shift on the Port City from where we started and what Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa envisaged and what President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is trying to do. When we had the Port Cities, first thing is we said is no foreign land ownership. So we converted the freehold that the Rajapaksa president had given into a lease. So that was one thing we resolved. Then we resolved to put this body corporate together, which is called the Port City Commission. And we were going to have standing members of it. Example, the Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, the Governor of the Central Bank. Later we added, I think, the person in charge of the UDA, the Central Environment Authority. And there were very standing members, and only a few members could be appointed, basically appointed by the Constitutional Council. Then Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, the former president, he looked at it, he changed it a little bit. What he did was, he basically extended the number of standing members who are going to be on the commission. Actually, it was an improvement on what we did. When we were having it, we were going to own the corporation completely, Sri Lankan interests. President Rajapaksa said, we can have Sri Lankan interests and maybe we can have Chinese interest in it as well. Fine. What are these people doing? These people are saying that the fund will be completely put in by the Chinese counterparty. We are not putting anything there. And they are also saying that the president shall appoint the 5 to 7 members. So there are no standing members. So these are people, we don't know who they can be. They can be foreigners, they can be locals, they can be dual citizens. So it is really, really worrying, because we are also going to give that commission or that body corporate legal powers, right, to operate there, which will not be subject to Sri Lankan law and jurisdiction as it stands today. So that's worrying. So there is also, apart from the more than the financial concerns here, there are governance concerns and geopolitical concerns that we need to be concerned about. So in its present form, the Port City law is unacceptable.
Mr. Wickramaratne, before we move on, we also have a viewer reminding us that the rupee itself is taking a dip. There's a 2.2% drop in the dollar. So that is also affecting the appreciation of the rupee in some of these days that we saw in the past. So we have to keep that also in mind. Moving forward, another important factor with time running out is the debate, or rather the lack of discipline we saw in Parliament yesterday. We saw both factions, actually. I can't point the finger at the government faction, but both factions. On the day, the entire nation was talking or remembering what happened 2 years ago. We saw what happened in Parliament yesterday. Now, I'm asking you this question because maybe I don't know whether you were there yesterday, but it doesn't sit well with the people. It doesn't sit well at all with anyone looking at it. I mean, I was reading the news yesterday and I felt really disappointed to see what was going on. What is your take on what happened yesterday?
It's unfortunate that the behavior inside the well of Parliament is really unacceptable. This has been happening for a period of time. Now, I think what we should be able to do is to take dissenting views and dissenting arguments, right, and not to really, go down to the well and have a scuffle about it, and it's deplorable. I would like to apologize on behalf of my party to all the aggrieved families, and particularly those who lost their loved ones because of the Easter bombings 2 years ago. And that was very, very unfortunate, and our sympathies are with them. We have to change this behavior for sure. I mean, it's absolutely unacceptable. But what we have a situation here is in Parliament is that we have a small opposition, and we have a government which has a 2/3 majority, and they are the bigger force there. And so they feel sometimes that that they can't cope with the small opposition, the impact it is having in the country with all these issues, and us taking out the message. So in a sense, what are they trying to do? They're trying to hunt down the opposition. And that's what they're trying to do. And that, you just can't do that. You say, this is a democracy. The whole world is watching at you. We saw this on in the United Nations Human Rights Council, what actually happened, you say. So the whole world is watching you. And now they're trying to hunt down opposition members, right? And in the media today, as you have learnt and seen, right? Mr. Harin Fernando, right? Our member of parliament, right? Basically, what are they trying to do? They're trying to question him, right? On, I don't know whether it's Easter bombings or whatever, right? This is, right, really an excuse for harassing members of parliament, right? This is what they are going to do. This looks like the direction they are taking. They're making a mistake. The country needs to come forward. Individuals are quite secondary. They should focus really on putting the country first, you see. So even with a 2/3 majority, it looks like it's a government with a lot of insecurity.
Mr. Wickramaratne, message coming in now. We are looking at a situation where we have about a minute, so I'm going to make this very quick. May Day rallies have been cancelled. There is a rise in COVID numbers in the country as well. Is there a connection between the two?
May Day rallies, right, were cancelled, right, really quite contrary to what was said by the government, not by the opposition agreeing to it. We were summoned to a meeting to discuss what the health regulations will be in force at our May Day meetings. That's what we were called to. And then when we got there, right, then they said they're cancelling the meeting. So it was not that the opposition ever agreed to it. I think the government itself was having a problem, because there's so much of internal dissension, and there was a lot of talk about different parties in the government having different rallies, and I think they couldn't get that together either, so they basically decided to cancel the May Day rallies. If the health authorities strongly feel about public participation, we as an opposition will respect it, but we don't want that coming from the governing authorities. We don't want that coming from the governing authorities, and governing authorities, I'm very clear, those decisions have to be made only by the health authorities. And I'm not talking about ministers, I'm not talking about the police and the armed forces, I'm talking about the virologists, the epidemiologists, and all the other health specialists in the field. And if they have concerns, we all must abide by it and stay safe, because I think we are going to have these ups and downs maybe throughout this year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wickramaratne, for coming and talking to us. I know you are busy and you have another appointment later on in the night, so thank you once again for being here and being certainly candid and talking about these issues like you do. That's it from Newsline this evening. We urge you to stay tuned and watch the primetime English news as well. We have some interesting stories there lined up for you. Thank you very much for watching once again. I was Chathuranga Hapuarachchi. Take care.